Good morning. Welcome to Pause for Thought number 6. Today we are back in Max Lucado's book, In the Eye of the Storm. Just in case you've missed the previous one that we've done from that book, Max is looking at a 24-hour period in Jesus' life, and he pulls together verses from the Synoptic Gospels in these reflections. And it is the day that Jesus hears about the death of his cousin and friend John the Baptist. He feeds the 5,000 after spending the day teaching them, and then he dismisses the disciples to go into the boat and go across to the other side of the lake whilst he goes and prays up on the mountain. He then joins them later in the evening, in the middle of the night actually, and walks to them on the water. And this is where Peter asks Jesus to tell him to come out and join him. So today we're going to be looking at a chapter called When Fishermen Don't Fish. Why have I chosen to look at that one this week? I don't know about you, but I've noticed that I've become quite comfortable at home. I get up when I want to, I work when I want to, so long as I get the projects in on time. You know, nobody really knows or cares that I work from 8 o'clock at night until 3 o'clock in the morning and then sleep all day. I haven't quite been that bad, but nearly. But being alone for so long, you kind of get used to it, and you get used to being the only person that puts demands on your own time and your own resources. And I know I've definitely become a bit more self-aware, self-orientated, dare I say self-centered. And I've been wondering, as we now face another relaxation on the restrictions, and we are allowed to now start to gather a little bit more frequently, how this solitude has affected our relationships. And when we get back together again, are we going to be, how can I put it? I'm wondering if some of our social skills have gotten a little bit out of practice. Are we going to be as forgiving? Are we going to be as quick to offer help? I don't know. All I do know is that the Bible tells us that the greatest commandment is to love God with all our heart, soul, and mind. And the second is like it, to love our neighbor as ourselves. And that means service to God and service to our neighbor. And I wonder, are we going to find that a bit more challenging as we get used to being back together again? Do we need to practice those skills again? So I think in terms of this chapter, it gives us something to think about as we think about those sorts of things. So I hope you enjoy it, and I'll post some questions at the end. So sit back and relax as we listen to Max Lucado and the chapter on When Fishermen Don't Fish. They were like sheep without a shepherd, so he began teaching them many things. Mark 6:34. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Matthew 14:14. It's a good thing those verses weren't written about me. It's a good thing thousands of people weren't depending on Max for their teaching and nourishment, especially on a day when I'd just heard of the death of a dear friend, especially on a day when I wanted to be alone with my friends, especially after I'd gotten into a boat to escape the crowds. Had that been me in Jesus' sandals on that Bethsaida beach, the verses would have read something like this. They were like sheep without a shepherd, so Max told them to quit grazing on his pasture and to head back to their own pens. When Max landed and saw a large crowd, he mumbled something about how hard it was to get a day off and radioed for the helicopter. Then he and the disciples escaped to a private retreat. It's a good thing I wasn't responsible for those people. I would have been in no mood to teach them, no mood to help them. I would have had no desire even to be with them. But, as I think about it, Jesus had no desire to be with them either. After all, he did leave them, didn't he? He had every intention of getting away and being alone. So what happened? Why didn't he tell them to get lost? What made him change his mind and spend the day with the people he was trying to avoid? Answer: take a look at 5 words in Matthew 14:14. He had compassion on them. The Greek word used for compassion in this passage is splankizomai, which doesn't mean much to you unless you are in the health professions and have studied splanknology. If so, you remember that splanknology is a study of the visceral parts, or, in contemporary jargon, a study of the gut. When Matthew writes that Jesus had compassion on the people, he is not saying that Jesus felt casual pity for them. No, the term is far more graphic. Matthew is saying that Jesus felt their hurt in his gut. He felt the limp of the crippled. He felt the hurt of the diseased. He felt the loneliness of the leper. He felt the embarrassment of the sinful. And once he felt their hurts, he couldn't help but heal their hurts. He was moved in the stomach by their needs. He was so touched by their needs that he forgot his own needs. He was so moved by the people's hurts that he put his hurts on the back burner. Maybe that's why God brings hurting people into your world too. All solitude and no service equals selfishness. Some solitude and some service, however, equals perspective. Here's a story to illustrate my point. When I was in high school, our family used to fish every year during spring break. One year, my brother and my mom couldn't go, so my dad let me invite a friend. I asked Mark. He was a good pal and a great sport. He got permission from his parents and we began planning our trip. Days before leaving, we could already anticipate the vacation. We could feel the sun warming our bodies as we floated in the boat. We could feel the yank of the rod and hear the spin of the reel as we wrestled the white bass into the boat. And we could smell the fish frying in an open skillet over an open fire. We could hardly wait. Days passed like cold molasses. Finally, spring break arrived. We loaded our camper and set out for the lake. We arrived late at night, unfolded the camper and went to bed dreaming of tomorrow's day in the sun. But during the night, an unseasonably strong norther blew in. It got cold fast. The wind was so strong that we could hardly open the camper door the next morning. The sky was grey. The lake was a mountain range of white-topped waves. There was no ways we could fish in that weather. No problem, we said. We'll spend the day in the camper. After all, we have Monopoly. We have Reader's Digest. We all know a few jokes. It's not what we came to do, but we'll make the best of it and fish tomorrow. So huddled in the camper, with a Coleman stove and Monopoly board, we 3 fishermen passed the day. Indoors. The hours passed slowly, but they did pass. Night finally came and we crawled into the sleeping bags dreaming of angling. We were in for a surprise. The next morning it wasn't the wind that made the door hard to open, it was the ice. We tried to be cheerful. No problem, we mumbled. We can play Monopoly again. We can reread the stories in Reader's Digest, and surely we know another joke or two. But as courageous as we tried to be, it was obvious that some of the grey had left the sky and entered our camper. I began to notice a few things that I hadn't seen before. I noticed that Mark had a few personality flaws. He was a bit too cocky about his opinions. He was easily irritated and constantly edgy. He couldn't take any constructive criticism, even though his socks really did stink, and he didn't think it was my business to tell him. Just looking out for the best interest of my dad's camper, I defended, expecting Dad to come to my aid. But Dad just sat over in the corner reading. I thought, where is he when I need him? And then I began to notice things about Dad and see him in a different light. When I mentioned to him that the eggs were soggy and the toast was burnt, he invited me to try my hand at the portable stove. Touchy, touchy, I said to myself. Nothing like being cooped up in a camper with someone to help you see his real nature. It was a long day. It was a long, cold night. When we woke the next morning to the sound of sleet slapping the canvas, we didn't even pretend to be cheerful. We were flat out grumpy. Mark became more of a jerk with each passing moment, and I wondered what spell of ignorance I must have been in when I invited him. Dad couldn't do anything right. I wondered how someone so irritable could have such an even-tempered son. We sat in misery the whole day, our fishing equipment still unpacked. The next day was even colder. "We're going home," were my father's first words. No one objected. I learned a hard lesson that week. Not about fishing, but about people. When those who are called to fish don't fish, they fight. When energy intended to be used outside is used inside, the result is explosive. Instead of casting nets, we cast stones. Instead of extending helping hands, we point accusing fingers. And instead of being fishers of the lost, we become critics of the saved. Rather than helping the hurting, we hurt the helpers. The result? Church Scrooges, bar humbug spirituality, beady eyes searching for warts on others while ignoring the warts on the nose below, crooked fingers that bypass strengths and point out weaknesses, split churches, poor testimonies, broken hearts, legalistic wars, and, sadly, poor go unfed, confused go uncounseled, and lost go unreached. When those who are called to fish don't fish, they fight. But note the other side of this fishtail. When those who are called to fish, fish, they flourish. Nothing handles a case of the gripes like an afternoon service project. Nothing restores perspective better than a visit to a hospital ward. And nothing unites soldiers better than a common task. When those who are called to fish, fish, they flourish. Jesus knew that. When he arrived at Bethsaida, he was sorrowful, tired, and anxious to be alone with the disciples. No one would have blamed him had he dismissed the crowds a second time. No one would have criticized him had he waved away the people, but he didn't. Later he would. Later he would demand their departure and seek solitude. But not before he healed their sick and taught them many things. Self was forgotten, others were served, and stress was relieved. Make a note of that. The next time the challenges outside tempt you to shut the door and stay inside, stay long enough to get warm, then get out. When those who are called to fish don't fish, they fight.